Good evening. And my name is Donna Thompson. I'm on the faculty here at Chandler-Gilbert Community College in English and Women's Studies, and I'm the program coordinator for co-curricular activities. And we'd like to welcome you this evening to our event sponsored by Student Life and Leadership and Multicultural and Co-curricular Programs. So I'm going to do a brief introduction of our guest tonight, and then we will open that up for his reading. And you're free to put comments and questions in the chat, and we will get to those after the reading. Hanif Abdurraquib is a poet, essayist, and cultural critic from Columbus, Ohio. His poetry has been published in Muzzle, Vinyl, Pen American, and various other journals. His essays and music criticism have been published in The Fader, Pitchfork, The New Yorker, and The New York Times. His first full-length poetry collection, The Crown Ain't Worth Much, was released in June 2016 from Button Poetry. It was named a finalist for the Eric Hoffer Book Prize and was nominated for a Hurston Wright Legacy Award. His first collection of essays, They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us, was released in winter 2017 by $2 Radio and was named a Book of the Year by BuzzFeed, Esquire, NPR, Oprah Magazine, Paste, CBC, the Los Angeles Review, Pitchfork, and the Chicago Tribune, among others. He released Go Ahead in the Rain, Notes to a Tribe Called Quest with the University of Texas Press in February 2019. The book became a New York Times bestseller, was a finalist for the Kirkus Prize, and was long listed for the National Book Award. His second collection of poems, A Fortune for Your Disaster, was released in 2019 by Tin House and won the 2020 Lenore Marshall Prize. His newest release, A Little Devil in America, was published with Random House earlier this year in 2021. He was also named a MacArthur Fellow, and he is a graduate of Beechcroft High School. So please join us in welcoming to Chandler-Gilbert, Hanif Abdurraquib.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for that intro. I'll tell you, there are. I was talking about how I lived in Gilbert for about 10 months or so years ago, and how that's an interesting part of what shaped my youth. So I'm going to read a little bit, but I do want to leave time for questions. I'm a big question and answer person. And before we get to questions, I want to just stress that, you can ask me anything. You can ask me, the questions can be about writing, but they don't have to be about writing. They can also be about pop culture or music or Ohio or sneakers or sports or anything you want. I think that we're all multiple different things from a writer. And so, I'm trying to honor that as well. So I'm going to read out of They Can't Kill Us Till They Kill Us. And the reason that, so I haven't read out of this book very often until recently. And I think the reason I feel compelled to read out of it now is because it's a winter book. I wrote it in the winter of 2016 mostly. And it feels like it is a book that is very much of winter and fall. And so I'm going to read a couple pieces and see how much time we got. Sorry, my dog is very eager to be pet, and so she is perhaps sticking her nose in the screen as she does sometimes. I'm going to read two pieces back to back. This piece is called Brief Notes on Staying, or No One is Making Their Best Work When They Want to Die. I don't mean sadness as much as I mean the obsession with it. Once, on the wrong edge of a bridge, a boy I knew who played songs let his feet slip off. I found a tape of his after he was gone, and the music sounded sweeter, or at least I told myself it did. What I really want to do is say that life is impossible, and the lie we tell ourselves is that it is too short. Life, if anything, is too long. We accumulate too much along the way, too many heartbreaks, too many funerals, too many physical setbacks. It's a miracle any of us survive at all. I know that I stopped thinking about extreme grief as the sole vehicle for great art when the grief started to take people with it. And I get it. The tortured artist is the artist that gets remembered for all time, particularly if they either perish or overcome. But the truth is, so many of us are stuck in the middle. So many of us begin tortured and end tortured, with only brief bursts of light in between, and I'd rather have average art and survival than miracles that come at the cost of someone's life. There will always be something great and tragic to celebrate, and I'm wondering now if I've had enough. I am, of course, in favor of letting all grief work through the body and manifest itself creatively, but what I'm less in favor of is a celebration of pain that might encourage someone to mine deeper into that unforgiving darkness until it is impossible for them to climb out. I'm less in favor of anything that hurts and then becomes theater, if that theater isn't also working to heal the person experiencing pain. I, too, am somewhat obsessed with watching creations that feel like work. I am less drawn to the artist who at least appears to make it look easy. But our best work is the work of ourselves, our bodies, and the people who want us to keep pushing, even if the days are long and miserable, and even if there are moments when the wrong side of the bridge beckons you close. All things do not pass. Sometimes that which does not kill you sits heavy over you until all the things that did not kill you turn into a single counterforce that might. No matter what comes out of a person in these times, the work that we make when we feel like we no longer want to be alive is not the best work if it is also not work that, little by little, is pushing us back towards perhaps staying, if even just for a moment. What I'm mostly saying, friends, is that I've lost too much. And everything sounds good when you know it was the last thing a person would ever make. All of the words sit more perfect on the page when they are the last words. What I'm mostly saying, friends, is that I am sad today. I am sad today and I may be sad tomorrow, but I watched a video where rappers hung out of the roof of a car and threw money in slow motion, and it made me briefly consider another type of freedom. I am sad today, but I held in my hands a picture of me on a day where I was not sad. In it, the sunlight leaked over my face in a city I love, and my eyes were wide and eager. I am sad today, and I might be sad tomorrow and even the day after, but I will still be here, I hope, looking for a way out every single time. Staying is not always a choice, and I have lived and lost enough to know that. But the way I think about grief is that it is the great tug of war, and sometimes the flag is on the side you don't want it to be on, and sometimes the game has exhausted all of its joy and all that's left is you on your knees. But today, even though I am sad, my hands are still on the rope. I am making my best work when my hands are on the rope, even if I'm not pulling back. Life is too long, despite the cliche, too long and sometimes too painful. But I imagine I have made it too far. I imagine somewhere around some corner, the best part is still coming. So this next piece I'm going to read is interesting because it was written at the end of 2016, but I've begun to feel like the years are almost interchangeable, as much as I don't want them to be. They have since 2016, and they've felt kind of new, especially these last two, but they have felt kind of horrifically interchangeable or sadly interchangeable. So this is Searching for a New Kind of Optimism. It begins with a quote from Zora Neale Hurston, which I'll read. It is so easy to be hopeful in the daytime when you can see the things you wish on. But it was night. It stayed night. Night was striding across nothingness with the whole round world in his hands. It's Zora Neale Hurston. My friends and I were wrong about a whole lot of things in 2016, and I imagine you and your friends were too, if the concert of all of our cages rattling in unison in our respective corners of the internet is any indication. I was once content with being wrong about the big things as long as I could cloak myself in hope for something better. But at the end of the year, in which I was wrong about almost everything, nothing about that felt worthy of praise, and so I opted for silence. A few days before Christmas, I drove to Provincetown, Massachusetts, at the very tip of Cape Cod, a beach town consumed by tourists in the summer months. It is largely silent in the winter. You might see a few committed locals, a handful of artists, a small mass of people shifting from bar to bar and tripping down Commercial Street, swaying and drunkenly singing into the calm. It gets dark early there, on the very northeastern edge of the country. On the day I arrived, it was the winter solstice, the darkest day of the year. At 4 p.m., it was pitch black. There's a particular kind of darkness that hangs over a space that's surrounded by nothing but an ocean, a vast, swallowing darkness. It's the kind that makes the memory of light seem hopeless, impossible. In a Cape Cod record store 2 days before Christmas, I picked up a copy of the 1977 Richard Hell and the Voidoids album, Blank Generation. Richard Hell holds open a leather jacket on the album cover. The words, "You make me blank," scrawled across his chest. I thought about the old Lester Bangs profile from shortly after this album came out, in which Richard Hell prattled on about how much he wanted to die. Later, rereading that profile, I found that Richard Hell wasn't searching for death as much as he was looking for a way to halt feeling entirely. I find myself, personally, far removed from such longing. And I also find it worth pointing out that Hell is still alive in 2017 and in 2021. In his most recent writings, he seems resigned to the wisdom that can come with age. So does Pete Townsend, long before he hoped to die before he got old. But even if I don't long for destruction the way these men once did, I understand how it feels to desire that kind of longing. All emotion, when performed genuinely and facing an audience, can be currency. Sadness and fear are, perhaps, the two biggest bills in the billfold. And what was haunting about both Pete Townsend and Richard Hell in their youth is that their death wishes seemed believable. They didn't sound like friends of mine joking on social media about wanting an asteroid to take us all out. Theirs wasn't a hope for human extinction, just the extinction of the self, the feelings that come with having to exist in uncertain times. There's plenty of rock optimism to counter this, of course, from Bruce Springsteen's insistence on overcoming through labor to Tom Petty's slick nostalgia as a survival tool. But when you grow up with punks, the kind of kids who listened to Richard Hell and then found more like Richard Hell, it is easy to feel some distance from the kind of optimism that we're taught to lean into during difficult times. Even now, I'm not as invested in things getting better as I am in things getting honest. The week of Christmas, I drove alone in the dark, and I did that in part, knowing that it would still be my work to find something small and hopeful within. My friends say I've gotten too cynical. And I suspect this might be true, judging by how quickly many people get exhausted when talking to me about the future. I'm working on it, truly. A therapist tells me to challenge my inner cynic, but when I do, I simply find another inner cynic behind that one. I am, as it turns out, a nesting doll of cynics. So I'm trying to hug my dog, but she is trying to get camera time, as she often does. This is what she does when I'm here alone too. So it's good that she's not just showing out for the camera. But a therapist tells me to challenge my inner cynic, but when I do, I simply find another inner cynic behind that one. I am, it turns out, a nesting doll of cynics. There is no evidence to suggest that humans are going to become any more kind this year, or any more empathetic, or more loving toward each other. If anything, with our constant exposure to all of one another's most intense moments, the bar for what we seem prepared to tolerate gets lower with every second we spend screaming into each other's open windows. Yes, without question, 2016 was a year that dragged on more heavily than most before it. It felt exhausting and like it would never end, but all past logic was pulling us towards that breaking point, a year that finally pushed us to the edge, and all logic in this moment points to another year that might not quite feel as long, but will surely be just as trying. And I have been thinking then about the value of optimism while cities burn, while people are fearing for their lives and the lives of their loved ones, while discourse is reduced to laughing through a chorus of anxiety. A woman in a Cape Cod diner the day after Christmas saw me eyeing the news and shaking my head. She told me things will get better. And I wasn't sure they would, but I nodded and said, well, they surely can't get any worse, which is the lie that we all tell, the one we all want to believe, even as the jaws are opening before us. I'm not sold on pessimism as a new optimism either. I need something that allows us to hope for something greater while confronting the mess of whatever all this hopefulness has driven us to. America is not what people thought it was before, even for those of us who are already familiar with some of its many flaws. What good, then, is endless hope in a country that never runs out of ways to drain you of it? What does it mean to claim that a president is not your own as he pushes the lives of those you love closer to the brink? What is it to avoid acknowledging the target, but still come ready to the resistance. The greatest song on a blank generation is the title track, on which Richard Hell shouts, "It's such a gamble when you get a face." I laughed when I heard that line in an empty room in the seeming always darkness of Cape Winter. In 2016, the gamble returned not only a bad face, but a hall full of mirrors turned on the faces of everyone who avoided looking deeply into those mirrors in the past years in the name of hope. The day before leaving the Cape, I ran into a man I had been seeing in the streets since the day I arrived. He was often drunk, but very kind. He stopped me on my run and asked if he could make a call on my phone. I didn't have it with me, and I muttered out an awkward response, littered with too much information about not carrying it while I ran. From the open door of a coffee shop, more news about Donald Trump blared from the television, flooding out into the street where we were standing. The man looked past me to the beach, drenched in gray and threatening clouds. "We're all going to die," he said. Then he was gone. We are all going to die. That's true, though I hope I get a few more trips on this sometimes wretched ride. I have tasted enough of its highs to know they're worth sticking around for, though not worth worshiping as a sole survival tool in the face of its lows. I've abandoned hopeless hope, but I am not rooting for the meteor. I am rooting for us still, my people, and their people, and their people beyond that. I am rooting for us to clean off the dusty mirror and look at the bad bet staring back. This is me challenging my inner cynic the best way I know how, taking a few lazy swings and seeing if I can tire him out in time to get back to whatever the real work might be this time. It's another new year, and most of my pals made it to the other side with me. Some of us called each other and heard each other's voices. Some sent blurry pictures drowning in fluorescent light. Some of us made sure that those who weren't alone knew they weren't alone. I have started other years at funerals, in hospital rooms, in studio apartments with my phone off entirely. So in spite of the newest realities that we must confront and stay uncomfortable with, I'm hoping that I get to stick around for a while. I'm hoping, mostly, that we'll all get better at wishing on the things we need, even in darkness. Okay, I'm maybe going to read one more thing, and then I got my eye on the time. And I do want to leave like 30 minutes for questions. But I'm going to read this thing about Kendrick Lamar and an activist from my hometown named Marshawn McCarroll, who's a friend of mine, a great poet and someone I looked up to and someone I organized with and someone I think about often. Marshawn took his own life in 2015. And yeah, I don't read this piece often. I mean, I don't read out his book often, but I've been thinking about this, and I've been thinking about Kendrick Lamar as Kendrick Lamar begins to kind of perhaps descend upon us once more with a new album or a new way to re-enter the world, which I'm fascinated by. Like Kendrick is an artist who, in some ways, I feel like I've gotten to grow up with a little bit, because Good Kid, Mad City, is the basis for my first poetry book, The Crown Ain't Worth Much. I listened to Good Kid, Mad City and wrote that book as kind of using that album as a framework. And so in a way, I feel like I've gotten to grow up with Kendrick as an artist myself. And so I'm always thankful for him, thankful for Marshawn McCarroll. I'm going to read this piece called Tell 'Em All to Come Get Me. And it begins with a quote from Marshawn McCarroll. "We speak of heaven as if we've been there, as if heaven was a mile away." That's Marshawn. "There are few things I love more than watching Black people joyfully greet each other. There's much to be made of the act in almost any setting, even though the tone of it may vary. The familiarity of a too forceful slap on the back during a hug, or the more gentle, 'How your mama doing?' pitched across a parking lot while someone throws down their bags and makes their way over for a hug. The more subtle nuances of a joyful greeting, sometimes rooted in relief or exhaustion, I walk through a sea of white faces in Salt Lake City or Portland or anywhere in America where I am made especially aware of the space I am occupying and how I am occupying it. From the sea emerges another lone black face, perhaps two. We lock eyes, raise an eyebrow, smile and give a nod, one that says, I see you and you see me. Even if no one else does, we know we're still here. It is an art, really, one that, like all institutions of Black joy, gets dissected, parroted, and parodied, but only the language that comes from the body, and rarely the language that is spoken. On the other end of the jovial, how you been doing, that bursts from the mouths of someone who you haven't seen in a while is often a response of, all right, or fine, or a favorite among people I know. I'm working on it. I sometimes consider this, how marginalized people quantify their own lives when compared to others who occupy the same world as we do. I say I'm all right, even when I've had good days. My father, a caring and deeply thoughtful person, has been all right for all the years I've known him. The Black woman who works in the market next to my apartment sighs, pats my hand, and tells me she's all right as she hands me back a receipt for another purchase. If there is a cost to this, the reality of fear, the fights that grow and seem insurmountable, the obsession with your grief in America as a beautiful and moving thing. It is a lowering of the emotional bar. Waiting for the other shoe to drop instead becomes dodging the avalanche of shoes, occasionally looking back to see the avalanche claiming another person you know, love, or have been on this journey of survival with for so long you could be family. I celebrate the expressions of unbridled Black joy because I know what it takes to unlock this, to have the joy of the body drown out the anxiety of the mind, if only for a little bit. I know that Blackness, when turned away from the mirror of itself and back onto America at large, is most appealing when there's a type of suffering attached to it. Sadness, anger, struggle dressed up and packaged to the masses. A quarterback dances to celebrate an accomplishment in a violent game, and words like class appear, hanging in the air for months. The daughter of a Black man murdered on camera by police records an ad for a presidential candidate, and the white people who support the candidate are so moved by her retelling of a life without her father. And I do imagine that it must be something to be able to decide at what volume, tone, and tenor you will allow Black people to enter your life for praise or for scolding. I think about this when I go to the gym and hand my gym card over to the same front desk person, always a white man. I ask how he's doing, and most days he says, good, really good. The link between Black music and Black survival shows up most urgently when the stakes are at their highest. When I say that music is how Black people have gotten free, I mean Harriet Tubman echoed songs along the Underground Railroad as a language. I mean the map to Black freedom in America was built from music before it was built from anything else. Black music is the shepherd, still pointing us toward any needed liberation, giving us a place to set our emotions, a room of our own. More than any other song on Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly, All Right signaled the arrival of a new song to nestle itself into this new historical movement, led by young Black people from all Black backgrounds, Black women, Black college students, Black queer and trans communities. The Black song that sits in the movement has often been a reflection of Black people in America, hope-rooted in reliance on faith, but still so often looking over its shoulder, checking for an exit. There are trains or chariots coming to take us away to a better place, a place just for us. There is the imagery of water, that which carried Black people to this place and that which will maybe save them from it. I've always viewed All Right as a part of the evolution of these songs. It's a song that clings to the idea of a hope that rests primarily on spirituality, but also a song that meets the people where they are and doesn't try to take them away. The dynamics of freedom have changed. The idea of freedom and escape becoming less physical. When Kendrick Lamar, before the first chorus, tells us, I'm fucked up, homie, you fucked up, it feels like permission to revel in whatever we must in order to feel alive. The song, a gradual unpacking of the author's failings, his rage, and his vices, all held close in the idea of surviving. Where so many songs from the past promised a new and improved paradise on the horizon, All Right promises nothing, except for the fact that there is pain and there will be more to come. We can push our backs against that door and hold out the darkness until morning, but the night has been so long, it feels like it might never end. All Right tells us to, instead, revel in the living, despite it all. When a smiling, joyful Black person says, they're doing all right, I imagine it's because they know good may be too close to the sun. I imagine it's because they've seen things burn. The heaven that Kendrick tells us is touchable might not be real. Or I maybe saw heaven this fall when Yale students marched across their campus in a demonstration against racial insensitivity. It was a seasonably chilly November day, and the well-attended and vocal march was visibly draining some of its participants. To fight for a country to see you as human is an exhausting thing. That exhaustion compounded by the physical exertion of marching, chanting, making your space your own. After the march wound down, someone found a loudspeaker, pressed play on All Right, and this imagined cloud of despair pulled itself back. People danced, hugged, rapped along with what parts they knew. I realized then that the magic of All Right is the same magic that exists in the body language of the joyful Black greeting. It fits so well into these movements because it pulls so many people on the front lines of them to a place of healing. It works as both a rallying cry and a salve. It meets you at eye level and gives you what you need, an escape from the fight or a push to get back into the fight. It is the warm nod and knowing smile from a Black face emerging in a sea of white. There is something to be said about an artist who can face their people, or rolling out the red carpet for whomever might choose to sneak in the back door while not being ultimately concerned with their sneaking. Kendrick Lamar says, "God got us," and the us crawls out of the speaker and wraps its arm around the Black people in the room. The way a good hug does, the way a good arm around a peer does, the way your arm wraps around someone in a parking lot, the way a preacher says, "we" in a Black church and the congregation hums, the way I say "my people" and my people know who they are, even if we've never met, or even if we've never spoken, or even if all we've had is a shared lineage of coming from a people who came from a people who came from a people who didn't intend to come here, but built the here once they arrived. There is something most comforting in this part of the song. Kendrick's promise that God got us. All of us, sure, but Kendrick is talking about the us who most need to remember that there is a God out there to be named, even if it isn't the one we pray to, or even if we are not of a praying people. There is a God to be pointed at and pulled close. There is a hope in Black gospel that I find alluring, even though I wasn't raised in a church, which echoes here. An urgency, even. Always a cliff to run towards, with the certainty that something will catch you. In February of 2016, an activist and poet from my hometown, Marshawn McCarroll, took his own life on the steps of the Ohio State House. I found this out when my then partner called up to me in the office of our apartment, miles away from Columbus, where I knew Marshawn, where we spent countless hours joking around at poetry open mics or bullshitting at local action events. I am used to the feeling of knowing the dead, having a touchable relationship with someone who is no longer present. The immediate moments after the news arrives never get any easier to manage. Marshawn ran towards a cliff, and there was nothing there to catch him this time. I went to Marshawn's Facebook page and saw his final message of, "My demons won today. I'm sorry." Right below was a picture of him and his mother, smiling at the NAACP awards. Right below that, a screenshot of a threat that was emailed to him from someone telling him they wouldn't rest until he shut his mouth. And the truth is, once you understand that there are people who do not want you to exist, that is a difficult card to remove from the table. There is no liberation, no undoing that knowledge. It is the unyielding door, the one you simply cannot push back against any longer. And for many, there are reminders of this every day, every hour. It makes All Right, the emotional bar, and the song itself, the best there is. It makes existence a celebration. I hadn't spoken to Marshawn in months, a thing that we feel most guilty about after a person is gone, especially if we are miles away from home or on a plane to somewhere even farther from home on the day of a funeral. The last time I saw Marshawn was at a protest. We hadn't physically seen each other in a while, and we embraced. I slapped his back, perhaps a little too hard, and asked how he was. He told me, I'm all right, I'm still here. Maybe all these heavens are the same. Kendrick Lamar's heaven, the heaven that all the trains and chariots took our ancestors to, the heaven on the other side of Harriet Tubman's river. Maybe all they ask is that we help hold back the darkness for as long as we can, and when we can't anymore, they'll save us a room. They'll make sure All Right is playing, and we'll feel a way it felt hearing it for the first time, in the face of all this wreckage, full of so much promise, as if all of our pain were a bad dream we just woke up from. Thank y'all. I guess now I'll open up for questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Hanif, for that wonderful reading. So again, for those of you watching the live stream, you can post your questions in the chat and they will be passed on to me and I will ask them. So I'll get us started while we're waiting for some of those questions to come in. I'll ask my stupid English teacher questions. So maybe to start off with, I've read some of your work. So in thinking about this, the interplay between music and performance that is in a lot of your work that also sort of intersects with these ideas of culture and identity and the lived experience. So is there something maybe you can speak to what in particular about music makes it an effective vehicle for these discussions?
Well, for me, I think music is something that, language is, I feel sometimes that language has limits, or I feel often that language has limits. And there's something about a sonic landscape that expands my imagination and expands what I believe narrative and storytelling and all these things are capable of. And so in a way, music is making sense of the world for me before I even sit down to try to make sense of it myself with a pen or with the limited language that I operate with. Music is doing that work for me already. And I find myself really challenged by the way that song opens up another universe for me to kind of enter. It is almost like dealing with getting a portal to another universe or getting a portal to a future, and then getting to be a tourist in the world, getting to be kind of a tour guide through that. And so there's a way that I think music speaks. There's a way music speaks that plainly, like language alone hasn't done for me and has never been able to do for me. And I think because of that, it just offers me a lot. I feel like it offers me a lot.
Okay. And so we have a question from the chat. So when it comes to your book, They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us, do you think all the deaths that happened in that year change your musical preference and the songs that you listened to?
I guess it would depend on the year. Because I wrote this book in 2016. But if we're talking about the past 2 years, yeah, I mean, I think that I will say that I feel like I've become a more hopeful listener. And not just when it comes to music, but also when it comes to like listening to my peers and listening to conversations. I've been a more eager and upfront listener and hoping that unlocks some kind of optimism for me because I think I'm running low on it, And as I read about, I'm somewhat propelled, or I'm eager to be propelled by optimism. But if we find, I found myself in the past, I don't even know what it is now, like 19 months, 18 months, asking myself questions of how do I personally keep going and how do I ask the people around me to keep going, even though I understand that it's a difficulty. It's like an impossible thing. And so, yeah, I mean, that definitely changed the music and the songs I listen to, but it's changing like how I listened, it's changing like how I'm hearing the world and how I'm hearing the people I love within the world.
Okay. Our next question is, along with Kendrick Lamar, do you have any other musical artists that really inspire you?
Yeah, I mean, Bruce Springsteen's one of my favorite artists of all time. I grew up with Sun Ra, Alice Coltrane, Whitney Houston. I'm open to being inspired by pretty much any musician that I don't really have a framework in which I operate. I'm kind of like open to and excited to, I'm an eager and avid listener. And so that means that for me, I am hearing the world as I'm living in the world, and always hoping to hear something new and unfamiliar that's pushing me to a different and better place. So I think I'm inspired by music broadly. Um, and I feel like I'm challenged by music broadly to become a better and more unique storyteller.
And maybe to follow up on that quirky question. So is there a subject or perhaps a musical artist that you haven't written about that's sort of on your to-do list or your sort of dream interview or piece that you would like to work on?
Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think there are musicians I am always excited about and interested in, but I feel like I have such freedom now to kind of pursue my curiosities as they arise. So I don't know if there's anyone who I like have on a list who I haven't gotten to, but um, you know, one big, they're the great elders. I think about Mavis Staples, who's someone I love, and someone who's still with us, and who I don't think has had a proper, generous reading of her career. And I think that's someone. It's the elders who are still with us. Who I think, particularly Black elders, particularly Black women in music. Folks who I don't think have gotten their due or have been um, assessed generously. And it feels like we get to these points where we lose these folks, and then people are like, "Oh, why didn't they get their roses?" But we have the opportunity to do that in real time. We have the opportunity to really, as writers and as dreamers and as imaginers of worlds, we have a chance to really form um, a type of garden for these people to pick from. I mean, my new book, Little Devil in America, I had a chance to write about Mary Clayton, and that was really great. And um, it's that kind of thing where taking responsibility and kind of not waiting for someone else to give these folks their roses, but building the garden on your own. So that's kind of where my mindset is.
And then maybe I'll ask this is going to sound like a quirky question as well. So though I've read some of your works before, but part of my pandemic reading was to read "They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us," and part of that was my now 14-year-old nephew instituted a mandatory weekly book club for our family because most of my family's still in Michigan and I'm out here in Arizona. So we would meet every Sunday night, and you had the responsibility to share a piece of writing, either from a book you were currently reading. You could read a short story or a poem, or if you're reading something longer. And so I shared part of this book with my entire family, and which got me to thinking about this question of audience. So that I shared a couple of sections with them. And so, my mother, who's a big Prince fan, was instantly taken by your writing on Prince. My nephew proceeded to, explain to me all the ins and outs of Ric Flair. And my sister, brought back wonderful memories of, her love for Allen Iverson. And so there was this wonderful sort of literary cross-generational moment that we had, over our little Amazon echoes, speaking to each other. And so I was wondering, who do you envision your audience to be? Are there particular groups you're attempting to speak to?
Not really. I mean, I personally, I'm too anxious to think about audience, because I get overwhelmed by that idea. But it is across. I'm glad you mentioned that there was kind of something for everyone in that book club experience, because I do envision whatever my audience to be. I envision it to be cross-generational. I envision it to be an audience of people who are of many ages and of many backgrounds and of many experiences, because that's kind of where I pull from. I'm writing with the knowledge that I got passed down from my elders, as much as I'm writing with the knowledge that I'm gaining in real time, as much as I'm writing with the knowledge that I've gotten from young folks. So I'm writing with these curiosities and excitements across many generations, and I want that to be reflected in the work. And I want to be someone who can effectively and thoughtfully articulate investments across multiple generations that don't feel small, like that don't feel, I don't want anyone's interests to feel small. And so my audience, I think, expands every time I sit down to write, thankfully, because the more that I take in of the world, and the more that I consume of the world, the more I want to kind of refract and push back into the world. And so my audience broadens with a broadening of my own kind of curiosities, hopefully. At least hopefully. I guess I can't say for sure, but that is the hope.
All right, we have a question from the audience. What are your top 3 Tribe songs?
Once again, Find a Way and Busta's Lament. Those are the 3 today, at least. That changes daily, though.
Okay. All right. So another question. So I read a bit of an interview with you that was in the New York Times, a New York Times article, where you referenced the work of Toni Morrison and her notions of decentering whiteness. And I was wondering if you could speak a bit to how you approach that in your own work. How do you use that idea from Morrison's work in your own writing?
Well, I mean, I think it's just going against these ideas of explanation and exposition that, for example, in A Little Devil in America, there's a piece about spades, and in it I don't explain how to play spades, and that's been a huge contention point, right? Like, largely white folks being like, well, this piece doesn't explain how to play spades. But in doing that, I believe I'm doing everyone a favor in saying that, well, imagine a world that's not catered to your desire to know everything. Because if you were imagining a world that is not catered to your desire to know everything, then I think you can really play. You can really be curious. What Morrison essentially was saying is, if we decenter whiteness, that serves everyone. That gives everyone a place where they can become as curious as I am. And that feels to me like a generosity. And so in one way, I'm writing for the people who already know how to play spades. But in another way, I'm writing for the people who are curious enough to want to find out how to play spades. Because it's only a little bit about a game, I think.
Okay. All right. We have a couple more questions coming from the chat. So when did you know you were going to be a poet? And so how did you know you were ready to be a writer?
I didn't really ever have it's funny, I didn't ever have a moment like that. I'm someone who, I come from a long line of storytellers, and I'm someone who loved telling stories. I'm someone who always thought it was natural to tell stories. And therefore, I did not excel at the time, I think, I did not excel in oral storytelling, but I did excel in the written story. And I think I'm just kind of serving the lineage that I came up in and believing that storytelling is something that I can immerse myself in comfortably and with ease. And so in some ways, I was born chasing after this kind of pursuit, not poetry exactly, but perhaps the written word.
Is there a genre of music that you don't connect with, and have you ever had to write about that genre anyways?
Kind of no on both counts. I mean, I'm, again, like, I know I keep returning to this word curiosity, but it is because I'm a deeply curious person, especially when it comes to music and sound. Now, when I first started writing music reviews, the only reviews I could get, the only reviews people would pay me to write, were the big pop albums that no one else wanted to write about. And so for me, sometimes I didn't like those albums, or I didn't like the artists, right? But that actually helped me as a writer, as a critic, because I got to avoid the kind of binary question of, do I like this album, yes or no? And then ask myself a perhaps better question of, is this album achieving what I think it's attempting to achieve? And when I got out of that binary, I think I became a better critic when I stopped asking the question of good versus bad and asking the question of, is this working versus is it not working? And so not genre, but album, sure. Yeah.
And our next question is, do you think music has been disregarded as a source which people can use to create or change and influence? And has it been seen more as an entertainment source? And does it depend on the music genre or content?
Oh, I don't think that's. I mean, I think it's always been. I mean, music has always balanced those two things. The source of entertainment is, I don't know if that's different for me. I don't know if that's different now than it was in the past. Now, I do think that musicians have more influence over the world currently, and some of them maybe don't utilize that effectively. But music has always been, I think, a source of entertainment primarily. And then musicians, I think, can occasionally effectively work to make it a source of social narrative. Now, we are maybe past the era of Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On" and Sly Stone's "There's a Riot Going On" and these type of things. But I still, I think that music has always been primarily an entertainment source. Maybe that's me being cynical again, but it's all right.
Let's see. All right. In your opinion, will there ever be another band or musician as influential as the Beatles? Or is the world too noisy for one band to incite that sort of change or fervor?
Y'all ain't gonna like this, but I don't think the Beatles are that influential. I think the better question is, will there ever be another band or musician as influential as all the black artists the Beatles borrowed from? Yeah, I don't know. I'm probably not the best person to answer that because I like a couple Beatles albums, but listen, man, yeah, like the Beatles. Talk to me about Little Richard, maybe.
All right, our next question. See, that's a good moment to go do some research, people, to see who influenced the Beatles, who the Beatles borrowed and took from. Who has been your favorite person to interview or favorite topic discussed on Object of Sound?
Oh, that's a good question too. I feel bad picking a favorite, but I will say I love talking to Adia Victoria. I really love talking to Adia Victoria. Just really brilliant and really thoughtful about the South, like Southern American history and the way Black music folds into Southern American history, and just also a very good storyteller. Also, just funny and a great talker. And so Adia Victoria, that was a lot of fun. Anytime I get to talk to Julian Baker, it's a real pleasure. And so getting Julian Baker was great. I'm a big Joan Armatrading fan. Like I love Joan Armatrading so much. Talk about like Black women musicians who haven't been properly given their flowers, and who have been massively influential. Joan Armatrading is, really up there. And I got to interview her last season, and it was so wonderful, because she's someone who like I love a lot, but I think broadly the world maybe doesn't treat with that level of affection. And so it was really cool to kind of just tell her how, part of Object of Sound and a part of the work I do, I think, is getting to tell people in real time how much you love what they do and what they've given. And that's something I think I take for granted or have taken for granted, the ability to get to do that in the past. And I think I'm really trying hard to revel in that now. And so Object of Sound has provided some really incredible opportunities to just like very plainly tell people, thank you for what you make.
Thanks. So, and this is going to kind of sound like a crazy question because I haven't quite worked it out in my head. But in thinking about some of the things that came up in your reading tonight and some of the things you've also mentioned earlier, so this idea of sort of being better versus honest, and this sense of joy and hopefulness, but also sort of peppered with realism and pragmatism. And I know a few years ago, with poet Claudia Rankine wrote a piece about the condition of Black life is mourning. And so maybe thinking about if you could talk a little bit more about this sort of shift from, I guess, sort of looking at, aspects as sort of weirdly liberal imagination of Black life, as it's seeing it as, it's this descent from slavery, it's this fight for civil rights, so that it's always this, as you pointed out, this sort of idea of suffering, of loss, and how do we move from that space into a place of sort of not necessarily youthful and misguided optimism, but some experience of joy and being able to share those other aspects of Black American life that perhaps get overlooked in the media and the news and in sort of political thinking.
Yeah, well, I think for me this is maybe too a bit of realism, but um, I think the only way we achieve that is stop trying to America's ideas of, I think, many non-white folks are just so narrow, right? And so to try to to try to show America the multitudinous nature of Blackness, for example, has failed, I think, for many years because it just doesn't. I think broadly America doesn't have the capacity to understand that, and so there are ways that I think, the real utopias I think are going to have to exist when we um, not only safeguard those things for ourselves, and I don't mean that in a harsh way, but understand where we can kind of exist pleasurefully without trying to cater to um, the kind of narrow definition of our many selves. And so um, that I think excites me, and I think there are artists who are doing that, and there are artists who are invested in that, and there are thinkers who are doing that, and thinkers who are invested in that. But I do think there's a utopia on the other side of that narrowness.
All right, next question is, so you can tell us how much Columbus, Ohio, and the community you grew up in has influenced who you are.
Well, it's a humbling place. It's a place where I think, I've discovered that um, it's a place that I feel where I feel known and cared for, and therefore it's a place that helps me define and understand what is important, and it helps me think through. I can see, although it's being rapidly gentrified, I can still see some of the very concrete places where I came from. You see some of the concrete places where I came up, where I struggled, where I had to build myself up, and that's kind of vital. It's vital to have access to that, to touch that. Um, it's vital to know what a community needs, to be a part of a community and know what that community needs, and to play into that community's needs in the best way you can. Um, and I'm lucky enough to be tapped into Columbus in a way that is constantly humbling, and in a way that comes with, I think, a real responsibility that I'm taking, that I try to take to in my writing and in my living.
Okay. I don't see any more questions in the chat. All right, so I will ask a question. So, and this is just as an English teacher who is faced with reading a lot of essays that are entitled Essay 1 and Essay 2, I am infinitely intrigued by some of the titles to your work, and some of them being very lengthy, and but also in some ways either setting us up for the poem or the essay that comes, or being, sort of leading us down a path that then the writing takes us somewhere else. And so can you talk a little bit maybe about how you think about the titles connecting to the works, and how you want to strike, I guess, again, this question of audience and your readers with if that title's the first thing we see, how does that sort of lead us in different ways from what actually happens in some of the readings?
Well, I think that the title, and I know that not everyone believes this, but I think the title should be a sentence as beautiful as anything else in the work. I believe the title, if I am to believe the work is beautiful and something I feel good about, I believe the title is also owed that level of beauty. I believe the title doesn't need to define anything other than a kind of curiosity and obsession with beauty. And sometimes I don't think the title needs to tell you where the piece is going. It just needs to get your attention. It needs to speak to you as the work is speaking to you. And if it maybe needs to inform you, to reveal something exciting about the speaker. And yeah, I just think the title is a good and fair extension of the self, and more than I think it's an extension of the work. But I do believe it's beholden to being beautiful first.
Nice. Lovely. All right. Well, I don't know if are there any in our last few minutes here, any last comments you would like to make about either about music, about writing, about being a Midwesterner, which is a whole nother show.
It is well known show. I know you're a Lions fan, so they got one yesterday, which is good.
We're counting that tie as a win too. That's how desperate we are.
Yeah, they're in rough shape, but it's like I have an interesting tie to the Lions because I grew up just obsessed with Barry Sanders, and yeah, I mean, I grew up loving Barry Sanders, and so I'm always rooting for the Lions to pull it together because I've watched them. Some would say they've wasted talent with Barry Sanders and Calvin Johnson, but I don't know. I think it's a harsh thing to put on an entire franchise.
All right, now see, we start talking about the Lions, and instantly there are more questions in the chat. So you have been to a lot of different concerts with the Travis Scott incident. Do you think this will change how concerts are done, and has this changed your views on going to concerts?
Well, it hasn't changed my views on the concerts, in part because I don't go to as many concerts as I used to, but that's in part because I think people at concerts just don't really care about each other. They don't take care of each other. I hate to sound like back in my day, but when I was younger, people at concerts, they took care of each other. They paid attention to the world around them. They cared for each other a little bit, more generously than they do now. So if there is anything that changes after the Travis Scott incident, which was immensely tragic, I hope it's that people care for each other and more aware of their surroundings at concerts, because I think that's really gone out the window in a way.
Right. And is there anything that pushed you to write about music?
Well, I grew up in a home where music was always playing. I grew up in a home where I was a musician and people around me were musicians. And there was a feeling that was embedded in me deep down about what music was capable of and how music was capable of shifting the world that I was in. And I wanted to mine for it. I wanted to understand it. And I figured if I wrote about it long enough, I might be able to figure it out.
Finally, Will, one last question. What is your favorite socially conscious song? And also, if a great socially conscious song was to be released tomorrow, who do you think would be the artist to release it?
I don't know if I have an answer for the second part, because I don't know. But I will say that one of my favorite albums is Sly Stone's "There's a Riot Going On," which has an anniversary, I think, this week or maybe today. I love that album. I think that album is very of its time and timeless, which I think these kind of things have to be. And for sure. "There's a Riot Going On" takes it.
So, all right. I think give people your last 30 seconds in the chat if you want to ask a question, folks. Make it quick. And just for any of the students who are watching online through the live stream, there is a link in the chat for you to check in for your attendance, to mark yourself attended, so that if you are required for a class or an instructor or the honors program to attend, that is your way of proving your attendance at the event. So make sure you click on that link and mark yourself as attended. And seeing no other questions, so let me again offer you our thanks from Chandler-Gilbert Community College. Thank you. And thank you, Wendy, because always the best participant. Thank you for sharing your writing, your thoughts, your time and experience, and being here tonight.
Thanks, everyone. Everyone enjoy the holiday, and please get some time to rest as the year winds down. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Good evening.